Banks, 70 West Madison Street, 5300, Chicago, 60602. Mr. Hankard, I want to ask you about a few of the things you discussed in your cross-examination. Mr. Lucahan's asked you about the Cal Ridge study and why you didn't stay at your equipment the entire time. Was there a reason you didn't stay at the equipment the entire time?
Yes. So with wind turbine projects, as I explained somewhat in my direct testimony, those nights when the turbines are operating at full capacity and the wind conditions are appropriate for measurements don't present themselves every night. So that study was 4.5 months long. I'm a hard worker, but I don't like standing in a property for 4.5 months. So we devised, so we have to do long-term monitoring in order to capture the breadth of conditions that we need. So to make up for the fact that we're not there, we do things like record the audio so that we can listen afterwards. So in a sense, we are there from a sound perspective, not a visual perspective, but you can't really see much at night anyway. And we use various techniques of time analysis and frequency analysis to be able to identify that's a car, that's a turbine. So we didn't not stay there just because we were lazy or didn't want to do it. We again, these projects take weeks to months, and we used tools to overcome the fact that we weren't there.
And was Dr. Schomer aware of how the measurements were done and who was present when?
Absolutely. Paul and I worked on that project together, and decisions were made together, and he was fully aware of the nature of the measurements.
And did Dr. Schomer ever give you opinion that what the two of you were doing in your noise measurement study was not in compliance with the Illinois Pollution Control Board regulations?
No, he did not.
You testified about adjustments that you make, I don't know if adjustments might not be the right term, but that you made in preparing your model for this project at the 1,000 hertz and 500 hertz, correct?
Yes.
And why did you make that adjustment at the 500 hertz and 1,000 hertz?
Okay, so Mr. Lucahan's asked me a lot of questions about the 1,000 hertz, but I don't. You can't forget the fact that we went in the other direction at 500 hertz, right? We added a decibel to our results to make them more conservative. And we do this because I have found through my measurement experience that not just with Cal Ridge, but with subsequent projects, that the model potentially underpredicts at 500 hertz, and I think that's a problem, so that's why I add a decibel to my results. And yes, I feel that the model overpredicts at 2,000 hertz, and that's why I back those numbers off. So it's based on nothing but my constant feedback of my measurements and my modeling and always comparing the two, and that is my professional opinion. A lot of people that don't get a chance to get out and actually measure these things don't have that kind of information, so they don't make any adjustments because they don't have the information to do so. I do.
And you testified that the 500 hertz adjustment was made, and I think you identified that as being more critical or of more importance than the adjustment on the 1,000 hertz. Can you expand upon that further?
Sure. Two things are going on there. Wind turbines produce the energy they produce peaks around 500 hertz, and then it drops off from there. So 500 hertz is being produced more so than 1,000, and the atmosphere absorbs more of the energy at 1,000 than it does at 500. So by the time the further and further away you get from a turbine, it's the lower and lower frequencies that are going to matter. And it's also the low frequency that has been the subject of concern. You've heard Dr. Schomer talking about low frequency and a lot of others. So again, I'm trying to be more conservative in the lower frequency and not as concerned with the higher frequencies.
And are there other items in your noise model that you view as conservative in the way that you do the model?
Yeah. Objection beyond the scope. question, I'd say go ahead. We want to hear what you have to say.
Okay. Well, it does tie into this whole 2 decibel thing, because I'm being, I guess, criticized, you could say, for taking this 2 decibels off. But please understand that a majority of acoustical consultants in this country utilize the same model, but there's different settings, the ground factor being primary among them. There's no handbook on this, so there's no one book that every acoustical consultant turns to page 7, there it is, there's how you do it. They call it professional judgment for a reason. There's some leeway. Well, I use this 0 ground, which means my numbers off the bat are 3 higher than practically any other person that would be sitting here in front of you. So most of the studies that I read that are submitted in this country, including others in Illinois, they use 0.5 ground. So their numbers are 3 less than mine. So I'm already coming in on the high side, and I boost the 500. So I just don't want that everyone harps on the fact that I've reduced the 2 dB at 1,000 hertz, but I want you to know there were 2 other major plays in the other direction.
And the 0 ground factor that you utilize, the use of that 0 factor, what is that representative of?
Oh, that's a complicated. It's essentially representative of the porosity of the ground. So if you have tilled soil, that's very porous. There's a lot of trapped air particles in there, and sound as it travels along that gets absorbed. The opposite end would be pavement or water. It's hard. This table, sound reflects off of it. So I'm assuming that the whole world is paved with a tabletop. Others are assuming it's paved with grass. And that's why their numbers are lower than mine.
Right, but the project area is not all paved, correct?
Well, no, of course, it's largely tilled earth and crops, and it's largely would be more representative of a 0.5, but again, I'm just trying to be conservative.
Right, and then Mr. Lugan's asked you questions about some regulations, Illinois Pollution Control Board decisions, SLG Exhibit 11, SLG Exhibit 13, SLG Exhibit 19, SLG Exhibit 21. Can you tell me, for all those 4 exhibits, where do those exhibits tell you how to do a model under Illinois Pollution Control Board regulations?
Well, none of them. I mean, the Illinois Pollution Control Board regulations do not require you to model or tell you how to model. They're all about compliance. They tell you how to measure, and they tell you what the limits are. So your model is really just you're making sure that if and when you ever have to measure, you're in compliance.
So you would agree that all the provisions in cases that Mr. Lucahan's asked you about all relate to measuring noise, not modeling noise. Am I correct?
That's correct.
And so how do you determine how to do the modeling so that you can give this board an opinion as to whether or not this project will comply, once it's operational, with the Illinois Pollution Control Board regulations?
Well, so we utilize these models, and again, it comes to that feedback loop of always going out and testing it, making sure a model is just a model, it's just an estimate, and there's only one way to find out if you're right or wrong, and that's to go out and measure, which we do.
That's all the redirect I have, thank you.
Land right for recross.
Would the board have questions?
On the nights that you did not stay for the studies, equipment was left there, how much of that data was used in your data sets?
Well, we used all of the data initially. We download all of the data, we review all of the data, and then we look for the nights, first of all, when the turbines were operating at, let's say, 50 or 75% capacity or above. So that would be the first cutoff. We don't want to be looking at nights when the turbines were barely working or not working at all. And then you start eliminating times when it's obvious that it's traffic, a truck going by, a big spike in the data, the turbines don't produce that kind of a spike. And then we also look at ground wind data, so that if it's one of these nights where it's very, very windy on the ground, you're not measuring turbines, you're measuring wind through the trees, or at least a majority of that. So ultimately, we whittle it down. So we start with all the nights, we look at all the nights, but then we keep whittling it down until we're left with those nights where the turbines were working near full capacity or at full capacity, and the ground winds were relatively light, such that we have a good signal. We can see, that's turbine noise, and we can tell from the frequency spectrum.
How many times have you been asked, or have you been asked, to come back and model on farms that you predicted due to complaints, resident complaints?
Did you mean measure, come back?
That time of measurement due to your model.
How many times? Somewhere, excuse me, 8 to 10 times.
And did you change your model based upon those measurements ever?
Well, no. Once we went to this zero ground, got the model conservative. Once I learned that lesson, there was no. I've never had to change. No.
So how did those measurements turn out that you had to go back on that she just asked you about? Once you went back, how did they turn out compared to your model?
Compared to the model, so some of the projects I get called in on, I was not the party that did the modeling, which is always a little more comfortable. And so on the projects where I modeled and I used my methods, the same methods I've used here on McLean, and I've never had an exceedance. I've never gone back and measured and found it to be louder than my model.
So the ones that you did go back on were someone else did modeling? Is that what you're saying?
I have done that as well, yes.
And did you find those to be noisier than what was predicted?
There was one case where that was the case, yes.
For the most part, though, modeling works.
It does indeed.
There's too many on. Thank you. You mentioned that you modeled your model is based on flatter ground, not so much with grass and other porosity-laden ground. So you model as if the ground were like flatter or would transmit sound more.
That it's hard. It's completely reflective. So all of the sound that hits it bounces up. Nothing is getting absorbed. That's what we are replicating.
That's what you assume. But out in the country, they're typically more rougher surfaces, like at least grass or something like that.
Absolutely.
Okay. In the exhibit, SLG Exhibit 6 on here, they have, I want to find out if you also include anything about the air. On page 35, it's like the second page in over on the right-hand side.
Excuse me, but which one is 6?
6 is health effects, it says up in the corner. It's the one with four different authors. Starts with George Heschler, Jeff Leventhal.
Yes, I have it now.
Yeah, so what he says is, page 35, it's on the second page, second column, second from the bottom. And he's talking about aerodynamic noise may vary in level in the blade passing frequency, and I'm quoting from this, giving amplitude modulation swish of about 1 per second. And here is frequencies in the higher kilohertz range. We had 500 and 1,000 here, those are the higher ones, are heavily attenuated, as in lessened, by air absorption and are not normally a factor in wind turbine noise at residencies. How do you factor in the air absorption? Here it's saying that the noise is heavily attenuated by the air absorption. Do you factor that into your model?
We do. Yes, the ISO 9613 standard that I follow and most others follow has a set of coefficients that you can choose one of those sets to mimic how the atmosphere attenuates sound.
And have you had much variation in your real measuring versus the modeling concerning the air absorption?
Well, there's no way to just tease that one attribute out because everything is occurring. The sound is spreading out, it's reflecting off the ground, and there's the atmosphere. So that would be a detailed scientific study beyond the scope of your average compliance survey.
So do you generally find that it attenuates by air absorption?
Oh yeah, that is one of the more, that is one of the things we actually don't have to argue about. Everyone pretty much agrees on the atmospheric absorption part of the standard.
Dr. Schumer mentioned a word called infrasound. Can you help me understand what that word is?
Sure. Infrasound is generally defined as the sound between 0 and 20 hertz, so very, very low in frequency. Would be, again, off the keyboard.
Okay, can you get high annoyance sound from infrasound?
So generally, no. The human ear is far, far less sensitive to low frequency sounds as it is to 500 hertz, let's say. So there's a chart on the very page that you just referred to showing the hearing threshold, and you'll see that the hearing threshold down in the infrasound range is somewhere between, say, 100 and 130, and then turbines don't produce those levels of sound even close.
Okay, thank you.
Could you explain the difference in sound generated by a taller 500 foot turbine versus a 400 foot turbine? In terms of requirement as far as how far it needs to be have the same amount of sound?
Sure. As Dr. Schomer alluded, it's really not about the height of the turbine per se. In our models, we do tell it where the height is, so it's accounted for. But height is not the determinant of noise level. It's blade length, blade speed, things like that. So when we start a new project, if we're using bigger and louder turbines, then they're going to have to be spaced out more. That's all there is to it. That is accounted for in the model.
So the same wind farm, you would have to have these turbines further from people's homes in order to comply?
That's correct. If you modeled it with a smaller turbine, you might be able to have setbacks of 1,500 feet, whereas it might be 18 or 2,000 for a larger, louder turbine.
And then when you ran your model, you determined whether or not they needed to have feathered blades?
Yeah, they're called low noise trailing edge blades, correct.
And how much do the low noise trailing edge blades cut in terms of decibels?
It's approximately, it depends on the frequency. Everything in sound is frequency dependent, so I always have to caveat everything, but it's about 3 dB.
And for the bats, somebody agreed that if they slowed the turbines, if they don't start the turbines until the wind was higher, they wouldn't hit bats. In this case, we're looking to abate noise or avoid larger noises. Is there a particular speed at which the turbines could be shut off if they were that much higher?
Yes, so modern turbines excuse me, have a ability to be, well, they're programmed. They are running off of They're constantly searching for the wind. They're constantly facing the wind and trying to adjust their blade pitch such that they turn as fast as they can, such that they extract as much electricity from the air as possible. That's their program. They're like a pit bull on the wind. You can program them to heel, so to speak, and turn the blades such that they don't go as fast as they otherwise could, which reduces the noise. So it's called noise-reduced operation. It's a programming change, and you can reduce levels in roughly 1 decibel steps, so they usually offer different modes. Low noise mode 1 would be 1 dB down, mode 2 would be 2 dB down. And of course you don't produce as much electricity as you would otherwise. That's the trade-off.
If you've answered it before, I apologize. Have you been called out on complaints, noise complaints, and taking these measurements?
Absolutely.
What has been your findings as far as the decibel ratings, and what has been your findings?
Right. There was the one project where there was an exceedance by a couple of dB. There have been some inconclusive projects, but by and large, we find that the projects are in compliance with the predicted levels and with the limits.
Did the complaints go away?
I mean, I don't know because they don't call me. They call the energy company. But I wouldn't think that me telling them all is well is going to make them suddenly think all is well. I'm not a fool. I'm just the guy that measures and determines if they're in compliance with the law or not.
Okay, thank you.
So you do have a state license or something to make that determination?
There's no such thing as a state license in acoustics other than the state of Oregon. I am a member of of 2 professional societies, and I work regularly with, for example, each member of this paper, that, except for Joff Leventhal, I have personally worked with each of these people. I've worked with Paul Schoner on multiple projects.
Thank you, Release. We appreciate you coming down.
All right, thank you.
Did you have any other witnesses that you're looking at?
We would ask Mr. Parzik come to stand. Oh, and before we do, we would ask to enter exhibits 11, SLG exhibits 11, 13, 16, 19, 20, and 21. We have all those, right? They were the ones that Dr. Shell just wrapped. Yeah, those will be entered in the record. Thank you. Mr. Parzik, you're still under oath?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Yeah, we still need your name and address.
You bet. So it's Kevin Parzik, P-A-R-Z-Y-C-K, 1 South Wacker Drive, Suite 1800, Chicago, 60606.
Mr. Parzik, Burns McDonald was your decommissioning engineer, correct?
That's correct. They prepared the report for this application.
Okay. And they estimated the decommissioning cost to be $5,280,000 approximately, or $52,800 per turbine, correct?
That sounds right. I don't have it in front of me, but that sounds right.
I can get down to the $9, but I don't want to do that to you. Do you recall when they were given that assignment?
I no idea.
Was it?
I would imagine sometime by the time we finalize the layout, sometime this past fall.
Okay. So several months before they finished it?
Probably, yeah.
Okay. And that was for 100 wind turbines, correct?
Yes, somewhere 100, it was done on a per turbine basis based on 100 turbine locations, so you amortize some of the fixed costs, so 100, yep.
Okay. And you were involved in the Pleasant Ridge application, correct? That was your project as well?
It was.
And that, again, just for the record, is the Livingston County project?
Yes, I'm sorry.
I'm not allowed to testify, you are.
Yeah, I can make you read those, aren't you?
Heck no. And you were present when the decommissioning study was presented on behalf of Energy in Livingston County, correct?
Yes, I was.
And for the record, Stantec prepared that for Energy, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
And
Yep.
that's SLG Exhibit 9? Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And Stantec's the same company that performed the shadow flicker study for you in this application, correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay. If you go to page 10 of the Stantec report, you'll see that the decommissioning study presented by Energy it was 136 turbines, correct, to recall?
Gee, I don't recall. Yeah, well, it says here based on 136 turbines, so yes.
Okay, yeah. And I had to find it too, so. And that, the total for 136 turbines at that location was $5,020,000 and change, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that averaged out, according to Stantec, at 36,877 per turbine, correct?
That's correct.
And after questions were raised about the decommissioning study, Livingston County hired an independent expert to review, to do its own decommissioning study, is that correct?
I'm going to object to questions about what Livingston County did concerning another project. It's not relevant here. And he didn't testify about Livingston County in his direct examination.
It's just the basis for the next question.
I agree with you. We're kind of going back on what we're doing in McLean County.
Well, I think the point is to show that a third-party engineer, and if we had time, we would have gotten one, but there's about 4 weeks to do this process, showed that in Livingston County, the third-party engineer showed that the costs were 50% of what they actually estimated.
We just testified to that, so we have no idea.
Well, Mr. Parsby can testify to it. He was at both hearings, and he was charged with both
You
projects.
just did. So.
No, I said he can testify to it.
We're going to hold the cross-examination of what was testified for originally. That's what it was brought back for.
Oh, wait a second. First of all, okay, then I would ask that my cross-examination end and I bring him my case in chief since he's here. He's here, I'm asking to call him as an adverse witness in my case in chief, and that is a cross-examination.
There's no right to do that under your rules. This isn't a trial.
Well,
You call adverse witnesses. Board's got subpoena power, but nobody else does.
I'm not subpoenaing him. He was sitting here and we asked him to testify.
You asked us last night to bring you back for cross-examination, and that's what we've done. And we're trying to live within that, what was testified. So I think that's our rule.
Okay. No further questions.
I'm sorry.
You gotta go through the board.
I'm sorry.
Does anyone on the board have questions? Now's your chance.
Take your time.
Mr. Parzak?
Yes, sir.
For the decommissioning study here that was done in McLean County, do you think that's a fair number?
I do. It was a different engineering firm than was used on our other project. I think it's a fair number. I think when you look at different numbers across the industry, it's reasonable. And again, as was pointed out in earlier testimony, it is reevaluated on a regular basis to make sure that construction costs, decommissioning costs, and salvage values are reevaluated regularly. This is in accordance with the AIMA document.
Okay, help me understand what the decommissioning, you have to have bond, you have bonded, just go through that process for me.
It's a financial instrument which the county will be the beneficiary of. So a bond essentially, and that bond has to be regularly maintained with a reputable bonding firm. And then like I said, the county would be the beneficiary if after the period of operation the turbines remain standing.
Do you ever use the contractors that you use around the country to direct these to give you estimates of this decommissioning cost instead of engineers?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Actually, we haven't done that as of late because generally most organizations are looking for someone with a professional engineering stamp, so we'll use an engineering firm, and that's just been sort of our process throughout the years. I mean, in some ways, one could look at going after somebody like a National Wrecking or somebody like that really knows how to take things down. They're probably not as meticulous as somebody who erects it, but they're very particular about separating out the salvageable products, etc. And in the end, that's probably who would take these things down.
I was a contractor, but I trust our estimates better.
True.
What number did you started with one number and then you came back and changed it? What was the ballpark?
I think the first number was somewhere on the order of 42 or 46,000, and it was pointed out that the depth of removal was 48 inches by the gentleman from the Farm Bureau, and we went back and said, you're correct, and we modified it to go down 60 inches on the foundation, and that increased the cost.
Yeah, ballpark, what did it increase the cost to?
I think it was about 10 grand a turbine. Yeah.
I did find one on decommissioning I had.
Oh boy.
Just so I understand in what I have read, the decommissioning is determined by the end of the lease and the non-renewal of the lease. Is that correct? Or how is it determined when a tower is going to be decommissioned?
It's no longer operating. There's a period of time where if the wind farm as a whole is not operational for a period of time and is not generating energy.
Okay, so it is a period of time.
Right.
Do you know what that period of time is? Or where I would find it in here? Because that was my exact thought.
I don't have that at my fingertips. I can find out and provide it, but I don't have it at my fingers. We will do that.
It's in our ordinance? Okay, I'll find it then.
Okay, sorry, thank you.
The AIMA with the Department of Agriculture may also have some timeframes in which to decommission. I don't recall, as I said here.
Staff have any questions?
In the long run, do you think that it is possible and likely that if these turbines are built, that they will be replaced indefinitely and not be decommissioned?
You know, it's hard for me to postulate. I will say, as I've said before, that the location of a generating facility is critical to the operation of the grid and how electricity is provided to end users. The fact that we will be connected to a transmission line with a connection facility, and that we have an infrastructure in place to bring the power all together from these, it's very likely that as technology improves, that this infrastructure will be utilized to continue to operate this as long as possible. Unless we get cold fusion or something. And,
Nobody can predict the future. I thank you, Rich.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for coming.
Mr. Lopez, did you have any other pieces?
I have two things I would like to raise. One is we would move to strike Professor Loomis's testimony and the school superintendent's testimony, Mr. Capasso, as irrelevant as well as any other testimony related to economics or jobs. Information like that clearly is not related to or relevant to any of the 7 special use standards in your ordinance. In fact, I believe the chairman already mentioned that as well at a prior board meeting, and we believe that testimony should be stricken as well as Mr. Loomis's report.
If I can respond, one, I think I realize Mr. Lukahans was not in attendance the first few nights, but to the extent that one had an objection, his clients had an objection to the relevancy of that report, that should have been made at the time the testimony was made or the report was submitted. So that any argument on that has been waived. Second, the economic impact of the project does relate to the public health, safety, and welfare and the public benefits of the project. So we believe it does relate to the standards for special use that this board is to consider. Additionally, I would point out under Illinois law, under the county's code, school boards are expressly permitted by law to appear and testify before zoning boards to talk about the impacts of projects on the schools. So for all those reasons, we believe that there's no basis to strike that testimony.
Okay, we're going to take that under advisement. We're not going to be done tonight anyway. We'll get back to you on that. I think we're ready for the next one. Before we get done tonight, I'm going to clarify what I said when we started. I misspoke, I guess, in a way, but I was kind of referring to the Mr. John Slagle report last night when I said we will put weight on experts. He was an expert in computers, and he was a nice guy. We appreciate his talk. We will put our weight on what he said, but he was not an expert on noise, and that's what I was trying to refer to. Everybody's willing to come up here and speak. We will take your testimony, and we listen to all of it. And that's what I was referring to, so sorry for the miscommunication.
We have one other exhibit to ask to be admitted into evidence.
Do you have someone lay the foundation for this?
Only me. And normally I wouldn't even say this is an exhibit, but to keep it in the record, I've asked that it be marked as SLG Exhibit 2. This is a memorandum of law regarding noise emissions and the standards under the IPCB regulations. And I'm not asking for anything now, I'm just submitting it to you for your review and your lawyer's review, and it gives you a little heads up on our position, as you heard earlier today, and we'll hear again in closing.
My counsel says to take that under your advisement.
In essence, it's a position statement on noise.
Anything else you should add?
No, that'll do it, thank you.
Lincoln County. Yale Young.
Mr. Young, before you start, were you looking to be qualified as an expert?
No,
Okay.
a long ways from it.
Okay.
My name is Yale Young, and I reside at, sorry.
I gotta swear you in first. We can do it the other way. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you give in this case now I'm hearing will be the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so you got?
I do.
Would you state your name and address for the record and spell your last name?
You bet. Yale Young, Y-O-U-N-G. And I reside at 27297 East 2250 North Road in Lexington.